Welcome to today's Cybersecurity Insiders webinar, where we will talk about election security, defending our democracy against well-resourced adversaries. Thank you for joining us today and taking time out of your busy schedules. Today's webinar is brought to you by Authenticate. Silo by Authenticate is a cloud-based web isolation platform that separates the things you care about from the things you cannot trust. My name is Holger Schulze, and I'm the founder of Cybersecurity Insiders, the online community for cybersecurity professionals, and publisher of the Cybersecurity Insiders research reports. And I'll be your moderator today. Now it is my pleasure to welcome our featured presenters. First, Matt Ashburn, and Matt Ashburn is former CIA cybersecurity officer and national security CISO at the White House, and currently head of strategic initiatives at Authenticate. Matt, thank you for presenting today.
Hey, welcome, Holger. How are you? Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. And next, I would like to welcome Mick Baccio. And Mick is former chief of White House Threat Intelligence and currently security advisor at Splunk. Welcome, Mick.
Thank you very much for having me, Holger. It's good to be here.
Excellent. All right. So election security is a hot topic, right? Especially now with the general election coming up quickly next November. Mick, Matt, can you tell us what we're going to talk about today and what we need to prepare for and look out for in terms of election security?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it. So today we're going to cover a couple things. One is the who and why of election security. What are the threats that are out there, as well as the motivations of the adversaries. And when we talk about adversaries today, by the way, we're talking mostly about nation-state adversaries, but there are more well-resourced adversaries out there as well that can also sway the election. We're also looking at some recent actions, both on the defensive side and also some that are on the cyber influence side that have been publicly acknowledged recently. And also we're going to talk lastly about how you can help secure elections. Everybody from voters to campaign officials to election officials and everybody else has a role to play in securing our democracy. So we're going to cover all these actions today in about the next 30 minutes or so. And then we also have a question and answer. So if you have any questions throughout this, feel free to pop them there in the question box, and we'll get to those towards the end. We also want to say that we have a couple of poll questions. So there's some audience participation here. Unfortunately, you can't see us today, but we'd like to interact with you in some way. So we have some poll questions. So the first question we want to ask, it's sort of a trivia question here. How many types of voting machines are used at least somewhere in the United States? So there, if you're playing along at home here, go ahead and select one of the following answers. How many types of voting machines are used somewhere in the United States today? 2, 4, 5, 6, or 8. I think the number is going to be somewhere between 2 and 8, but that's just a guess. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and proceed on. And so we'll get back to the poll answer in just a bit. You can see here in live results here of the quick poll of people responding here. So it looks like about 15% of folks have said 6, 61% have said 8, 12% of you said 5, 8% with 4, and 4% of attendees said 2. So the answer is, drum roll please. Okay, no drum roll, that's fine. So actually the answer is 5. There are actually 5 different types of voting machines used somewhere in the United States today. That includes hand-counted paper ballots, mechanical lever machines, punch card machines, scanned paper ballots, and direct recording electronic voting machines. Mick, I don't know about you. What's your favorite type of voting machine?
You know, just because they've been around for so long, I'd have to go just a traditional, diebold machine.
That's good. Yeah, my personal favorite, honestly, is the scanned paper ballots, because you can bubble in like an old school Scantron form where you bubble in your selection, and then you can actually feed it into a machine that then counts the vote. So the scanned paper ballots, that's my favorite. So let's proceed on. So there's a lot of stuff going on out there about election security, and wanted to start with this quote. This is actually from Bill Evanina, awesome guy who's the director of NCSC. So basically the counterintelligence chief for all of the United States government, and he's there to protect us from foreign adversaries, and has an amazing team there that's doing really tremendous work. And this is from a report that he publicly released in August, so just about a month ago. And he said that foreign states will continue to use covert and overt influence measures and also seek to compromise our election infrastructure for a range of possible purposes. So that's what we're going to talk about today is what are this range of purposes and what do these look like to the common folks? Okay, so Mick, in your experience, you've been a CISO for an election campaign, right? So what, from your perspective, what are some of the adversaries that we see out there, and what's all this about?
Yeah, I think Director Evanina's statement was spot on, right? But you and I have kind of done this for a little bit. We overlapped at the White House together, and we had a chance to see a lot of things even before that. I think Evanina's statement is really important when you put it in the context. It's a continued thing. When you go back to 2016, you go back to 2012, you go, 2008 and before that, nation state adversaries and well-resourced adversaries have an interest in the electoral process. When you look at everything, and we'll talk about each one, but the big three are obviously, Russia, China, Iran, and then others. We talked about this a little earlier today. It's just well-resourced doesn't always mean a state nexus. You could be really good at just one thing, and that's enough to cause a disruption. And we'll kind of get into the reasons for disruption a bit later. But yeah, I think a nation state, if you are a nation state at that level and don't have an interest in U.S. elections, you're probably playing the game wrong.
Yeah, that's true. And if you look at the scale, right, of our most capable cyber adversaries from a nation state perspective, those tier 1 or tier 0, depending on how you scale it, really Russia, China, Iran, maybe North Korea, and maybe one or two others that may be in the mix, depending on how you rank them. But these are the biggest adversaries that we have, right? And I think one of the most telling things is that there was this very public statement that came out from the U.S. government really detailing the adversary's strategy for doing this, and it serves as, I think, a big warning to everybody that's out there, right?
100%. When you look at, I guess I would call these actors, these are the big kids at the table. These are the world superpowers, and all of them have their own motivations, which speaks to them as, what their priority intelligence requirements are as a nation state. And they're all slightly different, but they all have an interest. And even when you look at not the tier 1 players, there are plenty of other people, plenty of other countries that have interest in the electoral process. Just because so goes America, it does have an impact globally.
Some of the reasons that we've seen, right, and this is actually detailed. If you want to go read further, definitely go seek this out. The NCSC, but also CISA from DHS has a lot of information out there that you can see. We're going to show you a couple of those links towards the end of our presentation. So if you don't have them right now, don't worry, stay tuned, and we'll give you the links to those. But really, it's for these types of things, right? And it's not just these, but these are some of the big reasons, right? So everything from swaying voter opinion to actually shifting U.S. government policies. So the election obviously is for the American people to exercise their democratic right to select their new leaders. And part of that is selecting leaders based on their proposed policies. So somebody may want, an adversary may want to influence an election or influence the democracy in some way so that they have adopted, or that the U.S. government adopts policies that benefit them. And then we also have the increased discord and division. We see that a lot too. I was on, I guess, Facebook last night actually, and I actually saw, it's a group of friends of mine, and it was interesting, but they were all arguing over a political topic that, when it comes down to it, it's kind of a minor thing. But in the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't matter very much, right? So some very good friends of mine were arguing and just insulting each other, and is getting a really heated argument over really a sort of a very small thing. And I think that you combine COVID-19 with this too, where people are already anxious and depressed, and their nerves are on the high end and high alert. It really is a great formula for sort of a tinderbox they're waiting to go up for an adversary to exploit, right? Because people are already ready to sort of jump on something and argue, and there's that high amount of tension that we already have because of everything that's happening in the world. And then you add to that the election and this foreign interference. It's a prime target, right?
100%.
Yeah, and so we have the rest of the list here.
Go ahead.
But what are some of these other things that we have there? Why else would an adversary want to influence an election? And how would
I think all these on the list are pretty standard, right? Depending on what your nation state goals are, I want to influence it. I want to I think embarrassment is a very big thing. If I can just, if I'm a nation state, I can just cause you to look stupid on a world stage. I'm going to jump at that opportunity 10 times out of 10. And
Totally.
I think all of the things on the list become magnified because of the world we live in currently. We got nothing but time, right? Where we're sitting at home, washing our hands, watching some version of the news, and all of these things, has become magnified because, like you said, it's just that tinderbox waiting for it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And really, people a lot of times when I think about election interference, in my mind, they kind of think about two things. One is some kind of hacking the election, which can mean a bunch of different things. But I think to a lot of people, they think, oh, it's just about hacking the voting machines themselves and changing the outcome by working on the arithmetic that's going on in the background, right? So you've cast your vote and then all of a sudden it gets flipped on the back end. But really, it's not really about that. They think it's that, and they also have heard about like foreign influence, right? Like Facebook and social media, but it's so much more.
So here, the problem becomes, and I had a really, really great conversation with Kim Zetter about this. The Election Assistance Commission, right? These are the folks that are actually in charge of securing the voting process, the machines, the vote count, all of that, right? That's the definition of election security. I tend to put things in three buckets where you have that voting, and we'll get to this part of it. You have those three buckets in a different slide, whereas the influence ops, it's the campaigns, and election security is a very, very narrow definition. And I think when you start conflating all those things, that's when it becomes problematic. But at the core definition, election security is just the machines, the voting process, that part of it. And everything else is just, I think the kids say YOLO now.
Yes, I think that's right. Or it's lit. Yeah. So do a really quick review here from some of this public information that's been made available from NCSC and CISA and others, right? So China, they're involved in this, right? Because they don't want Trump to win the re-election. Why? Because they want to shape policy that is pro-China. They also want to shape any potential political figures that might rise up, and they also want to deflect criticism, right? There's, with good reason, there's been a lot of criticism, whether it's trade and economic policy or human rights abuses or any number of other things that China is doing right now. And also, by the way, COVID, that's something else that is it's kind of a big deal right now. And as these tensions are rising, China is hoping to use election interference here as a method by which they can further their own goals, right? To deflect the criticism, to move some policies back towards a more pro-China stance. And they really do understand this thing and the importance of it.
I completely agree. I think like China and Chinese threat actors were kind of my jam for a while. And when you look at things like the 100-year plan, 5-year plan, and you look at the things that China is doing, they are very interested in the election, and they have very different goals when you look at someone like Russia. It's part of a long-term strategy that I think China excels at. And their interest in the election, as far back as I've been tracking China, they've been super interested in U.S. elections, and I don't see that changing. I think the current political environment, China-U.S. relations, kind of lends itself to them not supporting the current administration.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. You mentioned that, right? China being a big part of your career. I think about that too, right? All the time. Is that, I've been doing this cybersecurity thing for, I guess, almost 17 years now, and China's been a big part of that. They've kept me gainfully employed, I think, on the defensive side for a lot of my career. So they play the long game, right? They have the resources. And another one is Russia too. They also play the long game. They're not here for just.
I would say that's the longer game, right?
That's correct.
That's a longer game. Yeah.
It's pretty well known within the U.S. government circles, but I think a lot of people don't understand that. The Russians and the Chinese, to a lesser extent, they're okay waiting, 25 years for their seeds to grow and sprout into something that is then useful for them.
Yeah, 100%. I think when you look back at 2016, the election, what we know now, and being at the White House over the last election cycle, what we know now and what we know then are, you could write two completely different reports, and I think when you look at Russia as an adversary, what they've been able to put in place so many years before, kind of culminating into a specific tasking, and it's you gotta kind of tip your hat a little bit. They are a well-resourced, well-funded, incredibly capable adversary that I think has the biggest influence, just because this is not new to them.
Yeah, I would agree. And they not only have the very overt methods, but they have a lot of covert methods too that they're using, as Bill Evanina had alluded to there. They're great at it. You know, we'll give them some credit there. They're great at interfering with the politics and the government relations and foreign relations of other countries. They, you know, not only through the influence operations that people are familiar with from 2016, but vast cyber capabilities and other means of influencing things. So they use propaganda, right? Very, very successfully.
Super well. And I think it was there was a blurb in Bob Woodward's new book that had a line about there was a voting system vendor in Florida that there was malware on the election registration systems in like 2 Florida counties. And we spoke on this a bit earlier, but you know, I've said this a lot, like elections come down to a few states, a few counties, you know, inside those states, and that level of tactical, you know, planning and targeting, it's a testament to how serious they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, there was also the headline read, I just saw it this morning, just came out this morning, but the headline read, Biden campaign firm hit by suspected Kremlin hacking attack, right? And it was this is actually I think a pretty good example here. It doesn't have to be the campaign itself, it doesn't have to be the voting machines itself, but this is an attack attributed to Russia, or an intrusion attributed to Russia, or rather I should say an attempted intrusion, where a suspected Russian state actor attempted to breach some systems there at SKD Knickerbocker, right? And that's a huge firm, right?
Yeah. That's, again, a testament to targeting. Those folks that aren't really in the space and the political space, you know, they are a huge firm. And you know, kudos. I think it was Microsoft's team that kind of tipped that off. That was fantastic work. And it goes to the level of targeting. We talked a bit about it. It's not new to us, but it's kind of a new thing.
Right.
You're seeing it in a lot of new areas. A supply chain threat. We're just kind of shifting where that supply chain is, right? They, you know, SKD Knickerbocker, they consult for a lot of campaigns, a lot of different packs, things like that. And it's a supply chain risk. The same way, if I'm interested in your policy positions, I would target who you've brought onto your campaign or your environment to consult with you for your policy advice. That's when you see kind of targeting for their accounts, things like that.
Yeah, and you know, the other thing with Russia, another thing that came out in the news actually just a few moments ago was the U.S. Treasury. So, you know, props to the U.S. government and U.S. Treasury for doing this. They added a Ukrainian lawmaker by the name of Andriy Durkok to its specially designated nationals list, literally for trying to interfere in this election that is going to occur here in a couple of months. Why does this tie back to Russia? It's a Ukrainian lawmaker, right? But Russia has a very far reach, and the Treasury also came out and said, we know that this guy is an active Russian agent and has been for over a decade. Maintains close ties to Russian intelligence services and everything else. And again, this is publicly admitted by the Treasury Department. So good on them for adding these sanctions, right, to this lawmaker, and also admitting the reason why and tying it back to the election interference. In addition, they added 3 other Russian nationals as well for their associated work with election interference and more disinformation operations. Yeah, it's pretty incredible stuff. We also have Iran, right? You know, they're the other big name that you'll hear a lot. They're also against Trump, and their whole goal, and has been for decades now, they really want to undermine the U.S. in some way, right? This is not necessarily news to folks that are in the government sphere, but maybe to some other folks. They do have the online influence capability, right? And they're still pretty upset about U.S. sanctions that are on them, and they really want to undermine confidence in our democracy, undermine the U.S. policy and our institutions that we have here.
Yeah, I think when you look at Iran, they are very interested in the election, obviously from a policy standpoint, especially given the JCPOA. Iran and what I've noticed is they are very keen on proportional response, whether it's IRGC or MOIS. But their idea of proportional response differs than, I guess, what I would do. I wouldn't do something like DDoS the stock market. Right. But Iran is a very, very capable threat actor. And I haven't ever seen them like, deliberately intrude on things regarding elections, but definitely an interest from a policy perspective. And yeah, again, echoing online influence, I think that's a capability that a lot of threat actors, whether they are well-resourced or even just, they got like a AWS cloud at home, not AWS, but, some hosting at home. Yeah. It doesn't have to take a heavy lift anymore to kind of get an online influence going.
That's true. It's becoming cheaper and easier. Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a far cry from any kind of in-person attack or in-person influence or curating those human assets like some other adversaries might do. So we touched on some of these earlier, right? Some of these things that the adversaries might target, but really, Mick, when we talk about this, we kind of break into three big buckets, right? So we have the election infrastructure, the political campaigns themselves, and then also the voters. Every single one of us is a target for these types of things, right? In some way. Right,
100%. I think we kind of touched on it where election infrastructure, that is the EAC's mission. And like we talked about it, we're not going to dunk on anybody, any agencies, anything like that. They do a great job with the resources that they have and the time that they're allotted. I think the biggest problem when you talk about elections is it's not an issue until it's an issue. Political campaigns, I ran security for a political campaign. I was the first dude to really do it at that level, and it's kind of Wild West. There's no regulations. There's no NIST or FISMA or any kind of framework you have to follow. It's just whatever you want to do. And voters, I think that's the biggest threat, because that's just not a technical threat. I think that's a critical thinking threat, and there is no technical solution for critical thinking.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think it's probably the most damaging threat, honestly, because with the
100%.
There's actually going to be footprints left, and you can be detected in real time a lot easier, I think, if you're actually intruding on the supporting networks of the election infrastructure, or if you're breaking into a political campaign, right? So we just gave an example where the Russians just tried to do that, or rather there's a suspected attack attempt attributed to the Russians, to be clear there. And it was stopped. It was thwarted by Microsoft. So good on them, good on the private sector for working with the Biden campaign and their suppliers there and their consultants to thwart that and to raise public awareness of it as well. With voters, though,
Mystic.
Yeah, exactly. With voters, though, you can sway the opinions and divide people. You can make them sort of uninterested in the democratic process, and that's the really damage. That's the really big damage, I think, from this stuff.
Yeah.
And, I was just going to say there's a really good documentary out there if you're interested in the power of social media to change your opinions or to change your behavior. It's called The Social Dilemma. It's on Netflix right now, and I watched it a while back. It's actually really good. There's a bunch of tech industry veterans, some very, very, very senior folks that are in there, and they describe really the impact of social media and all these different platforms and applications that are out there. And we've all heard, like, if the application or the website or the service is free, then you're the product, right? So, advertisers want to buy advertising, and they're selling that advertising space to the advertisers, so that way they get your eyeballs on it. But there was actually a really good quote in this documentary, and rather than, I think saying that the users or the product is way too simplistic. So I totally agree with this. He actually said, and this is actually Jaron Lanier from, he's the founder of VPL Research, and he's also in the office of CTO over there at Microsoft, right? So really good guy, super experienced. And he said that the view that the user is the product is way too simplistic, and it's actually the gradual, slight, imperceptible change in your own behavior that's the product, right? So it's not about selling you something necessarily. It's about changing your behaviors, changing how you live, changing how you think, and changing the actions that you want to take. And so the adversaries, and in this case, that can be Russia, China, Iran, but it can also be super PACs. It could also be campaigns themselves. Then they want to actually change what you do and how you think and who you are, and your likelihood to support them, to support your some other candidates or their competitors, and also just to encourage you to vote or not vote in different ways, right? So there's a lot of power there.
Yeah, I think when you look at the technical fix, again, the guys over at Microsoft, over at Mystic, or over at Tag, or over at the Paranoids, all the technical teams out there doing a lot of work. That's a fix you can just, it's a 0 and 1 fix, right? Very binary. Either it's exploited or it's not. When you're trying to change someone's mind, that's where social media has a huge influence, and I think that's as big a problem as any technical issues that we've run into. I think they kind of play into each other.
Yeah, and the other thing that you mentioned earlier, right, is that CISA does an excellent job with its mission and what it's given. I do not envy Chris Krebs at all, or any of the other folks that we know over there at CISA. They're doing an excellent job with this, and they have a very tough mission that is in some ways very broad. And if you look at elections, frankly, a lot of people don't care about elections or election security until it's too late, or and by too late, I mean the election season has already begun, right? When's the last time that people were really talking about election security? You and I talked about this before, right? Probably 2018. And that's probably even a small subset of voters, right, that really care about the midterm elections. And then before that, 2016, maybe the first part of 2017. So people kind of have the elections, the election season ends, and people kind of forget about it till 4 years later, right?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things to do, and I know I'm not alone in this, is to dunk on DHS, because there's just a lot of reasons that you could. But I think when you look at the work that CISA is doing, DHS doesn't have a lot of authority to make people do things.
Right.
So a lot of the efforts that they have been successful with, I'd say a majority of them have kind of been grassroots, socialized efforts where they've kind of made people drink the Kool-Aid. On the campaign, I called it, I'm building a security culture heavy on the cult. And I think that's kind of what CISA has been able to do.
Bingo. Yeah, that's so true, man. They've done a really good job of that, I think. Yeah, I have to give them credit for that. They have a very difficult mission there. And look, changing culture is difficult too, no matter what you're trying to do. But in security, it's even more difficult, I think, because security is always inconvenient and it's a big change.
A buddy of mine, Scott Roberts, he put this in my head while I was working for the Buttigieg campaign, and it sums it up perfectly. A lot of what we do in information security is, on a campaign, being the security guy, I don't get to be the guy that says, hey, we raised $1 million yesterday, or we reached 10,000 new voters, or this social media thing we put out did this well. I'm that guy. I'm the eat your vegetables guy. I am the, did you encrypt that email? Did you put two-factor on that? I'm that guy. So I understand why security doesn't get that same level.
Yeah, and so we've talked about the voters and some of the campaign stuff. I think also, certainly the election infrastructure itself. We've seen some indicators there, and you mentioned one case earlier, right, where there was malware on some registration systems. Those are big things too, right? Where we're not trying to discount that at all. Those are certainly targets that are out there as well, and really you just got to have good security practices there.
Yeah, there was a note that came out recently, CISA and the FBI joint statement, hey, we haven't seen any cyber attacks this year on voter registration databases. But
I wouldn't hold your breath on that.
And I think it's, well, hey, they put a statement out, so it's got to be official.
Yeah.
And again, I think we're super good at retroactive analysis. Again, we're going back to 2016. There's a lot of things we look back and go, hey man, I wish I would have called some people that I didn't phone call, and we would handle things differently. But I think they are doing the best job with the resources they have and the time available. But if there's no attacks we've seen currently, we might find some incredible stuff later. But I think that's a testament to how far we've come since 2016.
That's very true. A lot more information sharing, especially between the public and private sectors, including CISA and DHS and FBI, like you mentioned too. So one thing that we wanted to share with folks today is how you can help. Right? Everybody asks, how can I help? Whether you're a voter or an election official, or you're on a campaign in some way, or you're volunteering in one of those three, there are ways in which you can help thwart the attacks on our democracy. And when we say that, we mean the influence of voters, or the attack on the election infrastructure, or the campaigns themselves. There are ways that you can help, right? Everybody has a role to play in defending our democracy. Yeah. So Mick, what are some of the ways that you've seen that voters themselves, right? That's probably the biggest population, because everybody's a voter, or everybody's a potential voter. That's a huge community of people, huge group of people. What are some things that voters can do?
Man, I don't know how much time you got, right? I think the biggest thing as a voter is separating the wheat from the chaff. Be a critical thinker. Yeah, just be confident in the accuracy of the information that you have. Hear out differing viewpoints. Shameless plug. Friend of ours, Cindy Otis, wrote a book, True or False. It's about how to spot disinformation, how to kind of critically think, how to separate what's true and what's not true, and kind of form your own opinion. Get involved is a huge thing I think you can do. There are plenty of groups out there. When you look at Ragtag, when you look at what the Harris Institute's doing, a buddy of mine, Tim, is kind of collecting technical volunteers to do things. Whatever resources you have available to you, whatever kind of skills you have, I guarantee there's a use for them somewhere. I think that's one of the things that voters can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hit on the big ones there, right? So I think, honestly, the biggest thing is to think critically and take a deep breath. When you see something on social media and it excites you, that's by design. The social media platforms know what excites you. They know the type of information that you'll respond to and in what manner. And so if you see a post online, or you see an advertisement, or you see something that's shared, whatever it is, and this can count for news, I think, too, these days. If you see something that really irritates you, or really makes you excited, and especially if you have in the back of your mind, like, yeah, I knew that was true, or, oh yeah, this totally destroys whatever the other side is, right? Think twice about sharing that, and think critically too about the language that's used and the sources that are used, if there are any sources. That's a huge part of this, right? And the reason these are so successful is because our adversaries are using social media against us. It's a great tool, don't get me wrong, right? We've had so many amazing things that have come from social media. You have, family members that maybe were lost at birth and now are reunited. You have people being matched for organ donation. You have great things that happen from social media, and funds that are raised for great causes. But those same ways that they target you for those good things can also be used against you and against the United States.
Going on to election and campaign officials, campaigns are hard. I know I preach like, hey, do basic stuff, right? Do the basic things and do them right. One of the basic things is getting visibility in your environment. And I know it sounds super simple to do, is like just see all the things, but that's hard. When you look at two-factor, I know, we preach hardware tokens. And the problem with hardware tokens is, if you work for the campaign that I support, okay, if you lose your hardware token, I will get you a new one. I will unlock your account in 20 minutes, whatever. If it's your personal account, and I've both seen this, the targeting goes to your personal account. There's not much that I can do as an administrator. I think me having the opportunity to be on the Buttigieg campaign, Chris DeRusha at the Biden campaign currently, Trump campaign's got some cyber folks as well. I think I hope that becomes a trend where we see more campaigns adopt cybersecurity. I will always sing the praises of Michael Kaiser and DDC, an organization that provides discounted services to campaigns to kind of enhance that security posture. And to your point, we were talking earlier about sharing information. It's gotten so much better than 2016, right?
Man, that's so true. And there's got to be a lot of credit given there. Again, you have the sharing between the private sector, public sector. So, you have Microsoft, Google, and also the social media networks. I don't want to trash those guys, right? Because all the big players there, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, all the big players have stood up dedicated teams to counter the foreign influence in our election season, right? And they've actually have a tremendous team of people at each one of these places, and in some cases they have some top tier talent that they've gotten from the government. Frankly, we know a few folks in those spheres that are doing some very, very tough work right now, and it's a tough job, and it's something where if you're successful in that job, sometimes people won't know, right? So it's in many ways, it's a tiring job. It's a tremendous burden, and it's not only difficult, but also many times unrecognized. So hats off to those teams there at Facebook and Twitter and the other social media partners that are really collaborating together within the private sector among them, sharing information, but also sharing information with the public sector and government as well. And we have a couple things here listed on the slide, right? So we have the EI-ISAC, right, which is for election infrastructure. We have there are also some state and local groups. You always have the FBI as well, InfraGard, all those things. But we've seen a marked increase in that collaboration from 2016. I think that was a big wake-up call for a lot of people, right, Mick? You had a lot of people that were like, man, I wish we would have done this, or I wish we would have known about this, or oh, in hindsight, we see these things that we really should have been able to see in real time, right?
I hear at least once a month, hey man, why didn't you call me in 2016? And yeah, I think when you look at the things that have been shared, the victim notifications have gotten a lot better. The process has been streamlined so much. The partnerships have gotten so much stronger between the public and private sectors. Everyone kind of wants to be involved in this space just the electoral process, just to kind of make that as strong as possible. And I think it's, compared to 2016, so much better.
Yeah, and you mentioned this earlier, but the campaigns themselves have really taken cybersecurity seriously, and you see them actually adopting better practices this year and actually bring in cybersecurity professionals to help them. If you're at all technically capable, check out the Harris Election Cyber Surge Program. This is something that if you're a technically proficient individual, you can actually volunteer to help out with some election-related security issues. Check them out there. It's harris.uchicago.edu, their Cyber Surge program. It's really, really good. And the other thing, too, that we didn't mention that we really should, the best way to thwart this foreign interference is to go out and vote, right? So check your voter registration, make sure you're registered to vote, make sure that is still accurate. Because again, if an adversary is targeting those systems or has targeted them, or even if you get removed from the rolls because maybe you didn't participate in the last couple of elections, great, fix that, right? Go vote, get registered to vote. If you're not registered, verify your registration and go exercise your right to vote. That's another thing I wanted to make sure we mention. Yeah, so some security resources here. We've talked about a few of these things. Again, DHS and CISA, they've gone leaps and bounds ahead of where they were in 2016 and really have done a great job in collaborating and sharing information. They've also deployed their network of Albert sensors, and that's to monitor some cyber intrusions. And what that does, it actually gives them a very widespread view across the country of election like registration systems and other supporting infrastructure to help look across the United States, across multiple states and jurisdictions and localities to look for signs of a potential cyber intrusion or attacks. And of course, they're monitoring this all the time, and they've come out and said they are seeing sort of the general internet badness that's out there, the scanning for vulnerabilities and that type of thing. And that goes back to what you mentioned, Mick, is those really good cybersecurity practices, don't forget about the basics, right? Just because you're in an election cycle and you have to keep things up or you have to meet certain deadlines, don't forget about the basic stuff, patching and vulnerability management, those types of things. User awareness is another big one.
The basics, doing them right. Then your security problem becomes specific to your vertical, right? And the campaigns are a very unique vertical. Elections are a very unique vertical. But basics, yeah, once you get those down, kind of move on to the next one.
That's exactly right. The other thing I want to mention too is, your incident response and contingency plans. It doesn't have to be a cyber attack to erode the public's confidence in our election systems or our democracy. It could be a power outage, right? That cuts off power to a polling station. You got to have a plan for that. So if you're an election official, make sure that you've developed these plans for incident response if it's a cyber incident, or for your contingency planning and continuity of operations planning, to make sure that you can carry out a vote in an election that is full of integrity and that remains confidential, and give the people the assurance that their vote matters and is counted the way it should be counted. Because it doesn't have to be Russia or China to erode the public's confidence. So those good basic cybersecurity practices, they still apply regardless of the season, regardless of the type of system that you're maintaining.
The trips we went on during our time at the White House, you plan for a contingency, like you take 5, and you plan for a contingency that no one ever thought of before, whether it's like the WAP going down or something like that. But always have a plan, because the most unique situation might come up, and just be ready for anything. And I think practicing that tabletop, that's kind of one of the hallmark things that you should do if you're on the other side of the keyboard.
That's right. And it's the what if game, right? And actually, I enjoy that. I really enjoy contingency planning. I love it. Which is kind of a nerdy thing, but I really do love it. It's what if my electronic poll books aren't available? Let's just, for whatever reason, doesn't matter. Let's say they're not available. Or let's say that I get indications, the day of the election, oh my God, our voter registration system's been compromised. What do? You can't just kind of run in circles there for hours trying to figure out a plan in the middle of an incident. The best time to plan is obviously now. If you don't have one, plan it now. Start planning right now and get that stuff in order. If you have electronic poll books, for example, have a plan. If they go down, if your electronic machines go down, have a backup and a backup and a backup to each of those, to make sure that you can continue on and carry on those operations that need to happen. Great example. Actually, this is real life. In Puerto Rico, just a couple of weeks ago, they had the primaries for this year in Puerto Rico. 3 million people roughly, in Puerto Rico. So it's not like a small territory. There are some states that have less people than Puerto Rico. They actually had to cancel the election, and I don't think this got much news in the mainland. But in Puerto Rico, they actually started voting without having all the ballots available. Like literally, like the ballots were not yet divvied up and distributed, and yet they started the election and they had people just waiting in line for hours and hours and hours, and it was just a total disaster. And then they actually went to court, and it went up to some very senior judges, and they said, okay, well, look, here's what you need to do. You still have to have the election. Now you have to, if the polls weren't open for a certain amount of time, then you need to make them vote next Sunday. So that they had the election basically the following week. But huge scandal, right? And what do you think that does to the people, to their confidence in the democratic process or their motivation to participate in it? So it doesn't always have to be a nation state actor. It can also be your supply chain issues and logistics issues and all these other things. There are a lot of things that can affect the outcome of an election. And so you just got to.
That is the most subtle, humble brag that I live in Puerto Rico that I've heard in a super long time. That is. Thank you for reminding me that I'm stuck in Arlington and you're in Puerto Rico. That's
yeah.
Thank you, Matt and Mick. And now before we, let me just pick the first couple of questions that are coming in here. And Matt and Mick, you just answer as you see fit, and then maybe divvy them up between the two of you.
Yeah, what do you have for us?
First question: how do election security efforts differ today from the election 4 years ago?
Gosh, I would say the biggest thing is really the level of awareness that we have and the resulting collaboration that we have among the campaigns, among the Democratic Party or the political parties, as well as the public and private sector. We have a tremendous amount of ramped up efforts on the government side with CISA, with FBI, with the ISACs, working across both. Great resources that are available that we didn't have available, frankly, 4 years ago. So hats off to all of those folks. That's the biggest one. And also the awareness that this is a thing. Mick, anything to add to that? Did I miss anything?
Yeah, I think 100%. Oh wow, we should care about this. Like we're at that stage, like we realize the problem we should do something about as a public-private partnership. I think we're a lot better at working together than we were 4 years ago. And it's not to dunk on anyone from 4 years ago. It's just like, speaking frankly, we kind of got our asses handed to us for when you look at the entire spectrum of operations that happen. And I think we've come a long way since then. I think there's a long way to go. I think one of the biggest problems is we only focus on this during presidential elections, kind of during midterms.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping this is something that we care about and continue to care about. But 4 years ago, I think we would have solved 2016's problems now, but the problems that we're facing in 2020's election, it's same problem, just more fierce.
Yeah, and the other thing too is that we have demonstrated success. We just named, in the talk here, 2 or 3 of these, right, where we've actually had great success with companies detecting potential attacks or intrusion attempts and stopping them, right? And not only stopping them and keeping it sort of hidden, because it's embarrassing when you're the target of something, right? It's a lot of embarrassment. Some organizations aren't comfortable sharing that. So now we have this culture here within the political arena where campaigns, election officials, whoever, they seem to be a lot more comfortable too in sharing this information about the attacks and what they're seeing with other folks. So it's extremely helpful. And so that wasn't around either, I think, 4 years ago. So hats off all around to those folks.
Excellent. Thank you, Mick. Thank you, Matt. One more question here. And the question is, if an organization is starting a security and cyber defense program from scratch, what should they focus on?
So I would say from like the CISO's perspective, right, I would look at your basics. Whenever I go to like a new organization, I always look at sort of the top 5 things in my mind. And that kind of helps me assess the organization's cyber maturity, right? So are you patching and how up to date are you on patching? Vulnerability management, your incident response capability. Do you have one? Do you have, is it 24/7? Are you monitoring things? Do you have your logs and audit capability going to a centralized place? Do you know who your suppliers are? These are sort of like the building blocks for your cyber program, your cybersecurity program. You can't do much of anything without those, right? So, and if you're starting from scratch, you have to really get back to basics there, focus on those. And there are some things that can help you accelerate too. If you are starting from scratch, like, Mick, for example, you're from Splunk, right? Huge fan of Splunk. Mm-hmm. I'm a huge fan of Splunk. I've used them throughout my career many times, and even for my personal projects too. They're an awesome capability, and there's a lot of flexibility there to very quickly get information at your fingertips that you need to support cyber defense capabilities, as well as IT operations. I think there's big value in that too. So not only your cyber defense team, but also your IT operations team, whoever's maintaining your systems, can use that data as well. Getting your data to one place. And of course, being from Authenticate, I'm also a big fan of browser isolation as well, to help support the defense of your endpoints, right? So you don't have to worry about your endpoints if you never bring malware or untrusted code down to the endpoint. Mick, anything else that I missed there?
I think
like a campaign perspective, what do you think?
Yeah, I think when I rolled campaign for a World Security for campaign. It's no different than a small to medium business, right? You find your crown jewels, like what are the most important assets in your company digitally, and protect those the most and kind of work your way out from there. Visibility on everything. One of the quotes I like to butcher is, if I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of my robust collection apparatus. I think getting visibility into your own environment is something that is important to do, because you'll know what's going on. You'll know those vulnerabilities. You'll know those weaknesses in your perimeter, and you kind of increase that along the way. And, like we talk about the browser stuff that you guys are doing with Silo, that's a very real thing if it fits inside your threat model. And it probably does maybe not for the entire environment, but I guarantee there's some people inside your company you need that for. And it's just kind of assessing that environment, finding out what your crown jewels are, and it starts from there.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of weird that, you and I ended up both at, you at Splunk and me at Authenticate, because I think both really work very well to rapidly advance, regardless of the size of your organization, right? They, not having these capabilities is a big gap. So the two together work very well, and you got to have both the cyber defense and also that zero trust model, and that's kind of what Silo is all about, is that true zero trust. Why are we downloading any content from the web at all to our endpoints? And that's how traditional browsers work. So it's kind of a cool capability from both companies, actually. So and like I said, I'm a big fan of Splunk because you really can see across your organization. Yeah, you have your cyber defense, your auditing stuff that you can do with it, but you also just gain so much intelligence. And if you have a large enterprise, there's so much going on there. It's really difficult to discern what's going on unless you can get that data into a usable form where you can run reports, have dashboards. I'm a big fan of dashboards too, by the way. It really can give some really good insight and show you some indicators there where something's not quite right.
Excellent. Well, Matt, Mick, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your insights on election security, right? And what we all can do to at least help ensure the integrity and security of elections. And yeah, with that, we're at the finish line for today's session. And yeah, as we're closing this webinar, I would like to thank you all for joining us. And I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. Matt, Mick, thank you again for sharing your insights and for presenting on election security for us. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Walter, and thanks to Cybersecurity Insiders for having us. It's been great. Glad to have you. Glad to have the audience and the participation.
Yeah, fantastic time. Thank you for having me. If anyone didn't get to ask their question, at Matt Ashburn, at NoHackMe on Twitter, find us on there, and we'll pick this up again. Thanks so much today.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. Now, this concludes today's session, and I hope we will see all of you again at one of our future webinars. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.